The wind howled like a wounded animal through the Colorado mountains, driving snow against the warped boards of the cabin until they groaned in protest. Inside, Margaret Sullivan pulled her threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders and stared at the dying embers in the fireplace. Her stomach had stopped complaining days ago, resigned to the emptiness that had become her constant companion. She had been somebody once, back in Chicago. They'd called her the Angel of Mercy Hospital, the nurse whose steady hands had pulled dozens back from death's doorway. Young doctors sought her counsel, and wealthy patrons praised her dedication, but that was before the night everything changed, before young Timothy Morrison died on her watch, and his influential family decided someone had to pay. Margaret's fingers unconsciously traced the worn letter in her pocket, the one that had sealed her fate. Negligence, it read. Gross incompetence resulting in death. Never mind that the boy had hidden his condition, that he'd taken medicines that reacted fatally with the treatment. Never mind that 3 doctors had examined him and missed what she'd caught too late. The Morrison family needed their pound of flesh, and a nurse from immigrant stock made an easy sacrifice. The scandal had destroyed her utterly. No hospital would employ her. Former colleagues crossed streets to avoid her gaze. Even her modest savings evaporated in legal fees for a battle she couldn't win. So she'd fled west, as far as the railroad would take her, then farther still, until she'd found this abandoned prospector's cabin high in the mountains where shame couldn't follow. That had been 3 months ago, when autumn still held promise and her small purse held enough coins for basic supplies. Now February's teeth bit deep, and the last of her cornmeal had run out a week past. The snare she'd set for rabbits remained stubbornly empty, and the roots she'd stored had frozen solid in the corner. Margaret stood slowly, her joints protesting the movement. At 32, she felt ancient, worn down by cold and hunger and the weight of her disgrace. She needed firewood, though the thought of venturing into the storm made her bones ache. But freezing to death seemed only marginally worse than starving, and at least the cold would be quicker. She wrapped rags around her worn boots, knowing they'd soak through within minutes, but hoping they'd provide some protection against the snow. Her coat, a man's cast-off she'd bought from a traveling merchant, hung loose on her diminished frame. Margaret had always been small, but months of deprivation had carved her down to sharp angles and prominent bones. The moment she opened the door, the blizzard tried to force its way inside. Snow swirled in violent eddies, obscuring everything beyond a few feet. Margaret squinted against the assault, pulling the door shut behind her and stumbling toward the woodpile she kept beneath the eastern eave. Her hands, once so skilled with surgical instruments, now trembled as she gathered what pitiful sticks remained. The cold bit through her thin gloves like hungry teeth. She'd managed perhaps half an armload when the wind shifted, momentarily clearing the air. That's when she saw him. At first, Margaret thought her hunger-addled mind had conjured the sight, a dark shape against the white, too large to be natural, too still to be alive. But as she stumbled closer, the shape resolved into something that made her healer's instincts override her weakness. A man lay face down in the snow, his heavy coat torn and darkened with what could only be blood. A horse stood nearby, head hanging low, reins tangled in the bare branches of a scrub oak. Margaret dropped her firewood and rushed forward, her boots sliding treacherously on the frozen ground. She fell to her knees beside the still form, her trained hands automatically searching for signs of life. There, a pulse, thready but present. His skin held warmth beneath the layer of snow. She tried to turn him over, gasping at his weight. The man was large, broad-shouldered and tall, built like someone accustomed to hard labor. It took all her depleted strength to roll him onto his back, revealing a face that might have been handsome under better circumstances. Dark hair fell across a strong brow, and several days' worth of beard shadowed his jaw. Blood had frozen in rusty streams from a wound near his temple, but it was the hole in his coat that concerned her most. High on the right side, still seeping crimson into the snow. Gunshot, her mind supplied with clinical detachment. Recent, maybe 6 hours, judging by the blood loss and his body temperature. Margaret sat back on her heels, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the situation. She had no medicines, no proper instruments, barely any food or warmth to offer. The sensible thing would be to take what she could from his saddlebags and let nature take its course. He'd likely die anyway, and attempting to save him would only hasten her own demise. But even as the thought formed, her hands were already moving, checking his breathing, assessing the wound. She'd sworn an oath once, back when such things mattered, to do no harm, to preserve life where possible. The world had stripped her of everything else, but apparently it couldn't take this fundamental piece of who she was. "Sir," she said, shaking his shoulder gently. "Sir, can you hear me?" No response. Margaret glanced at the cabin, calculating. 20 feet, that might as well have been 20 miles. She couldn't carry him, could barely support her own weight. But she had to try. The horse whickered softly, steam rising from its nostrils. A beautiful animal. She noticed absently. A bay stallion with white stockings, the kind of mount that cost more than she'd ever seen in her life. Its saddle bore tooled leather and silver conchos, the mark of someone with means. An idea struck her. Margaret struggled to her feet and approached the horse slowly, speaking in low, soothing tones her father had taught her back on their small Ohio farm. "Easy there, handsome. Easy now. I need your help." The stallion allowed her to take his reins, too exhausted by the storm to protest. Margaret led him closer to his fallen master, then knelt again. If she could somehow get the man draped over the saddle. It took nearly an hour. 3 times she collapsed, her strength failing. 3 times she forced herself up, driven by stubborn determination and the ticking clock of the man's blood loss. Eventually, through a combination of leverage, desperation, and the patient horse's cooperation, she managed to heave the unconscious form across the saddle. The journey to the cabin became a nightmare of stumbling steps and burning muscles. Margaret led the horse, one hand clutching the reins, the other pressed against the man's back to keep him from sliding off. Snow pelted her face, and the wind tried to tear them all into the white void. When they finally reached the cabin, she nearly wept with relief. Getting him inside presented another challenge, but adrenaline lent her strength she didn't know she possessed. She pulled him from the horse, letting him fall heavily onto her as she staggered backward through the door. They collapsed together on the floor, Margaret pinned beneath his weight, gasping like a landed fish. The horse would have to fend for itself. She managed to remove its saddle and bridle, tossing them inside before the animal wandered toward the lean-to that served as a makeshift stable. At least it would have some shelter there. Margaret crawled out from under the man and pushed the door shut, then turned to examine her patient properly. His color had worsened, lips tinged blue with cold and blood loss. She needed to act quickly. Her medical supplies consisted of a half-empty bottle of whiskey she'd been saving, some relatively clean cloth torn from her spare petticoat, and a sewing kit with silk thread. Not much, but it would have to suffice. She built up the fire with shaking hands, using some of her precious kindling to create enough warmth to work by. Then she set about the familiar ritual of treating trauma, letting muscle memory guide her where thought might falter. The coat came off first, revealing a sodden shirt beneath. Margaret cut it away with her kitchen knife, exposing the wound. The bullet had entered below his collarbone, and she couldn't find an exit wound. Still lodged then, which meant infection was almost certain without proper treatment. She cleaned the wound as best she could, using melted snow boiled in her single pot and what whiskey she could spare. The man stirred at the sting of alcohol, muttering something incomprehensible, but didn't wake. Margaret considered it a mercy. What came next would be far worse. The bullet needed to come out. She held her knife in the fire until it glowed, then let it cool just enough to handle. With no laudanum, no ether, nothing but her determination and his unconsciousness to see them through. She began to probe the wound. Blood welled fresh, and her patient's body went rigid. His eyes flew open, wild and unfocused, and one hand shot out to grasp her wrist with crushing force. "Please," Margaret said, meeting his pain-clouded gaze. "I'm trying to help. The bullet must come out." Something in her voice or face must have reached him. His grip loosened fractionally, and he gave the barest nod before his eyes rolled back. Unconscious again, but for how long? Margaret worked quickly, her world narrowing to the wound, the knife, the search for foreign metal in living flesh. There, a scrape of steel on lead. She adjusted her angle, praying she wouldn't nick anything vital, and managed to work the bullet free. Fresh blood flowed, but not the pumping arterial spray she'd feared. She packed the wound with whiskey-soaked cloth and sutured it closed with neat, tiny stitches that would have made her old instructor proud. The head wound proved superficial, requiring only cleaning and a simple bandage. By the time she finished, full dark had fallen. The storm continued its assault on the cabin, but inside, a fragile peace descended. Margaret sat back, trembling with exhaustion and delayed reaction. She'd done what she could. Whether it would be enough remained in God's hands. The man lay still on her floor, chest rising and falling steadily. In the firelight, she could see he wore quality clothes beneath the blood and trail dust. His boots alone would fetch enough money to keep her in supplies for months. A successful rancher, perhaps, or a mine owner, someone whose absence would be noted. Searched for. Margaret wondered what violence had brought him to her door. The West bred hard men and harder choices. Perhaps he'd earned that bullet. Perhaps the men who'd shot him were even now tracking him through the storm. And she'd invited death into her home alongside him. But watching his face smooth into something approaching peaceful sleep, she couldn't bring herself to care. For the first time in months, she'd used her skills for their intended purpose. She'd fought death and, at least temporarily, won. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. He'd need constant care to stave off infection. She had no food to aid his recovery, barely enough firewood to keep them warm. But tonight, Margaret Sullivan allowed herself one moment of satisfaction. She was a healer still. Disgrace be damned. The fever came with the dawn. Margaret woke to the sound of delirious muttering, her patient thrashing weakly on the floor where she'd been forced to leave him. She dozed fitfully in her chair through the night, starting awake each time his breathing changed. Terrified she'd find him gone. Now she knelt beside him, pressing her palm to his burning forehead. Too hot, dangerously so. The wound had begun its inevitable protest against the crude surgery, and without proper medicines, she could only fight the infection with what nature and determination provided. "Water," he rasped, eyes flickering open without truly seeing. "Catherine, water." Margaret fetched her tin cup, supporting his head as she helped him drink. His dark hair was soaked with sweat despite the cabin's chill. She'd need to break the fever before it consumed him entirely. Throughout that endless day, she bathed his face with snow-cooled rags and forced willow bark tea between his lips. The only medicine she had, harvested months ago when she still believed she might survive the winter. The man tossed and turned, sometimes crying out names. Catherine, Samuel. Others she couldn't catch. His hands clenched and unclenched as if grasping for something just out of reach. During one of his clearer moments, his eyes focused on her face. They were gray, she noticed, like storm clouds over the prairie. "Angel?" he whispered hoarsely. "No," Margaret said softly. "Just a woman. You're safe now." His brow furrowed as if puzzling through a difficult problem. "Shot me. Harlan's men. The water rights." Before she could ask more, he slipped back into delirium. But those few words painted a picture she recognized all too well. Water rights. In this drought-prone country, water meant life or death, and men killed for less. The second night brought crisis. His fever spiked dangerously, and the wound began seeping through its bandages. Margaret knew she stood at a crossroads, without intervention. He'd be dead by morning. She had one option left, one desperate gambit. Outside, the storm had finally exhausted itself, leaving crystal-clear skies and brutal cold. Margaret wrapped herself in everything she owned and ventured out to the horse's shelter. The bay stallion nickered softly, having found the old hay she'd forgotten was stored there. In the saddlebags, she discovered treasures beyond hoping. A flask of good whiskey, clean bandages, and, Blessed miracle, a small bottle of laudanum. There were also personal effects that confirmed her suspicions about her patient's status. Letters addressed to Mr. Jackson Mitchell, owner of the Double M Ranch. A leather wallet containing more money than she'd seen since leaving Chicago. A photograph of a young woman with kind eyes and Mitchell's strong jaw. A sister, perhaps. Margaret took only what she needed for medical purposes, though the money called to her empty stomach like a siren song. She'd maintained her professional integrity through disgrace and starvation. She wouldn't abandon it now. The laudanum allowed her to clean and redress the wound properly. She mixed a stronger willow bark decoction with the good whiskey, creating something that might actually help fight the infection. Drop by precious drop. She fed it to him throughout the night, monitoring his temperature and pulse with obsessive attention. By the third dawn, the fever broke. Jackson Mitchell opened his eyes to find himself in a strange place, weak as a newborn colt but blessedly clear-headed. The first thing he noticed was the pain, a deep, throbbing ache in his chest that sparked to fire when he tried to move. The second was the woman. She sat slumped in a rickety chair beside him, clearly exhausted. Not young, not old, but worn thin by hardship. Her dark hair, streaked prematurely with gray, had been pinned up hastily. Her dress had been mended so many times it was more patches than original fabric. But her hands, resting in her lap, were clean and bore the calluses of honest work. Memory returned in fragments. The ambush at Devil's Creek, Harlan Doyle's hired guns stepping out from behind the rocks, the burning punch of the bullet, his desperate flight through the gathering storm. Then, nothing. He tried to speak and managed only a croak. The woman stirred instantly, eyes snapping open with the alertness of someone accustomed to crisis. "You're awake," she said simply, reaching for a cup. Small sips. The water tasted like life itself. Jackson submitted to her ministrations, noting the practiced way she checked his bandages and pulse. "You're a nurse," he said when his voice returned. Something shuddered in her expression. "I was long ago. Not so long. I'd wager that was professional work." He gestured weakly at his bandaged chest. "Jackson Mitchell, I owe you my life. Miss Margaret Sullivan." She rose stiffly, moving to tend the fire. "And you owe me nothing. I did what anyone would do. Anyone wouldn't have dragged a stranger twice their size through a blizzard." Jackson countered. "Anyone wouldn't have dug a bullet out with kitchen implements. Anyone wouldn't have broken a fever with skill instead of prayer." Margaret's hands stilled on the poker. "You were delirious. You couldn't know." "I know enough." He studied her profile, noting the sharp angles that spoke of hunger, the proud set of shoulders that refused to bend despite everything. "I know you saved me when you barely have enough to save yourself." She turned then, and he saw defiance flash in her brown eyes. "I don't need your pity, Mr. Mitchell." "Good, because I'm not offering it. I'm offering gratitude. And there's a difference." They regarded each other across the small space, two proud souls recognizing something fundamental in the other. Finally, Margaret returned to her chair. "You mentioned Harlan Doyle," she said quietly. "He's the one who shot you?" Jackson's jaw tightened. "His men, acting on his orders. We've been feuding over water rights for 2 years. The stream that feeds my ranch also runs through his property downstream. This drought has made things desperate. Desperate enough for murder. In Harlan's mind, yes, he's already driven off 2 other ranchers, bought their land for pennies when their wells ran dry. But the Double M has senior water rights, legal and binding. The only way he gets them is if I'm dead." Margaret absorbed this information with a nurse's objective calm. "Will he come looking?" "Count on it. His men saw me ride into the storm, but they'll figure I couldn't have gone far." Jackson tried to push himself up, gasping as pain lanced through his chest. "I need to get back. Warn my people. You need to lie still before you tear those stitches." Margaret's hands were gentle but firm as she pressed him back. "You're in no condition to ride. You don't understand. If Harlan thinks I'm dead, he'll move on the ranch. My foreman Sam is good, but he can't hold off a full assault. And my sister," his voice roughened, "Catherine runs the household. She won't abandon the place, no matter the danger." The names from his delirium. Margaret felt an unexpected twist of sympathy for this man fighting to protect what was his. She knew what it was to lose everything to those with power and influence. "How many days before they come?" she asked practically. Jackson calculated. "The storm would have covered my tracks. They'll search the usual shelters first. Line shacks, caves. This place is isolated enough they might not find it immediately. 3 days, maybe 4. Then we have 3 days to get you strong enough to travel." "We?" He raised an eyebrow. Margaret met his gaze steadily. "You can't ride alone in your condition. You'll need help reaching your ranch. The Double M is 15 miles through rough country. You'd be putting yourself in danger." "Mr. Mitchell, I've been in danger since the moment I dragged you through that door. At least this way. I can see my patient through to safety." Jackson studied her for a long moment. There was steel in this woman, hidden beneath the worn exterior. He'd built his ranch by learning to judge character quickly, and every instinct told him Margaret Sullivan was someone to trust. "All right," he said finally, "but I pay my debts. Miss Sullivan, when this is over, you'll go back to your life, and I'll return to mine." Her tone brooked no argument. "For now, you need food to rebuild your strength. I'll see what I can manage." She moved to the corner that served as her kitchen, and Jackson saw her shoulders tighten as she surveyed her meager supplies. Pride kept her from admitting the truth, but he could read the signs. The empty shelves, the single pot, the way she'd carefully rationed the water she gave him. "My saddlebags," he said carefully. "There should be some jerky, hardtack, trail food, but it'll help." Relief flickered across her features before she masked it. "I'll check." As she went outside, Jackson settled back, marshaling his strength. He'd survived the ambush and the fever. Now came the harder task, getting home alive with a pack of killers on his trail. But something about Margaret Sullivan's quiet competence gave him hope. She'd pulled him back from death once. He had a feeling that was just the beginning of what this remarkable woman could do. The jerky tasted like hope itself. Margaret chewed slowly, savoring the salt and smoke, trying not to wolf it down like the starving creature she'd become. Across from her, Jackson Mitchell watched with eyes that saw too much, understood too well. "When did you last eat a proper meal?" he asked quietly. She considered lying, then decided against it. Something about this man invited honesty. "Before the last supply run to town. 6 weeks ago?" Jackson's expression darkened, but not with pity, with anger. 6 weeks. Christ almighty." "I've managed," Margaret said stiffly. "You've survived. There's a difference." He shifted carefully, still weak but improving hourly under her care. "Why here? Why this particular piece of nowhere?" Margaret stared into the fire, weighing her words. "Sometimes nowhere is the only place left to run." "From what?" The question hung between them like smoke. She'd kept her shame locked away for so long. Speaking it aloud felt like reopening a wound. But he'd trusted her with his life, his troubles. Perhaps she owed him this much truth. "From disgrace," she said finally. "From the ruins of everything I used to be." Jackson waited, patient as the mountains themselves. It was that stillness that undid her, so different from the hectoring prosecutors and angry accusations she'd faced in Chicago. "I was senior nurse at Mercy Hospital," Margaret began, her voice steady despite the pain of memory. 12 years of service, hundreds of lives saved. Then Timothy Morrison was brought in, 15 years old, son of a banking family. Stomach complaints. His mother said, nothing serious. She paused, gathering herself. I examined him, found signs his family hadn't mentioned, bruising that suggested he'd been in fights, pupils that responded strangely to light. I suspected he'd been taking patent medicines, possibly laudanum. But when I tried to tell the attending physician, he dismissed my concerns. The Morrisons were generous donors. Their son couldn't possibly be involved with such things. But he was, Jackson guessed. Cocaine tooth drops for pain, laudanum for sleep, God knows what else. When we gave him ether for what should have been routine surgery. Margaret's hands clenched. His heart stopped. Everything I tried, every technique I knew, nothing brought him back. The fire crackled, filling the silence. Outside, wind sighed through the pines like regret. The family needed someone to blame, she continued. A wealthy boy couldn't have died from his own dangerous habits. It had to be incompetence, negligence, and who better to carry that blame than an Irish immigrant's daughter who'd risen above her station? Jackson's jaw tightened. They scapegoated you. Thoroughly. The trial was a mockery. Witnesses were suddenly uncertain about what they'd seen. Records disappeared. The physician who'd ignored my warnings testified that I'd never mentioned any concerns. Margaret's laugh held no humor. 6 months later, he received a new wing named after the Morrison family. And you ran. What else could I do? No hospital would hire me. My reputation was destroyed. My savings gone to lawyers who couldn't fight money and influence. She gestured at the shabby cabin. So yes, I ran, as far as I could, to a place where my shame couldn't follow, where I could disappear. Jackson was quiet for a long moment. Then, my sister Catherine is a healer too. Not trained like you, but she has the gift. She tends anyone who needs it, ranch hands, neighboring families, even Harlan's people when they come asking. She says healing isn't about who deserves it or who can pay. It's about answering when someone calls for help. Margaret looked up, startled by the parallel. 3 nights ago, you answered. He continued. Exhausted, starving, with every reason to let a stranger die. You answered. That tells me more about who you are than any Chicago jury ever could. Tears stung her eyes. She blinked them back fiercely. Pretty words won't change what happened. No, but they might change what happens next. Jackson leaned forward, catching her gaze. I meant what I said about paying debts. Margaret, the Double M needs someone with medical skills. Catherine does her best, but she's had no formal training. And there's a town nearby, Martinez, that's been without a doctor for 2 years. I'm not a doctor. I'm a disgraced nurse who saved my life with kitchen implements and willow bark tea, who kept me alive through fever and infection with skill and determination. His gray eyes held hers steadily. I don't give a damn what Chicago society says. Out here, we judge people by what they do, not what others say they've done. Margaret stood abruptly, needing distance from the intensity of his offer. You're grateful, I understand, but gratitude fades. Mr. Mitchell, when you're back with your people, when you remember I'm just a fallen woman who— Stop! The command in his voice surprised them both. Jackson softened his tone, but not his conviction. You're not just anything, and I'm not some green boy making promises I won't keep. When I offer something, I mean it. She busied herself checking his bandages, needing the familiar ritual to steady herself. His skin was warm, but no longer feverish, the wound showing early signs of healthy healing. Her hands trembled slightly as she worked. Why? She asked quietly. Why do you care what happens to me? Jackson caught one of her hands, stilling its nervous movement. His palm was calloused from years of rope and leather, but his touch was gentle. Because I recognize something in you, the same thing that made me fight for my land when everyone said I was too young, too inexperienced. The same thing that made Catherine stand by me when our parents died and left us with nothing but debt and dreams. Margaret looked down at their joined hands, his sun-bronzed and scarred, hers pale and work-worn. What's that? Steel, pure, stubborn steel that bends but doesn't break. He squeezed gently before releasing her. The West needs people like that. God knows I do. She pulled back, wrapping her arms around herself. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you could have taken my money while I was unconscious. Could have left me to die and survived another few months on what's in my saddlebags. Instead, you used the last of your supplies to save a stranger. Jackson's expression softened. I've built my life learning to read people quickly. It's kept me alive more than once. And you, Margaret Sullivan, are someone worth knowing." The compliment warmed her more than the fire. She'd been defined by her disgrace for so long. She'd almost forgotten there might be more to her than failure. "I watched you during the fever," Jackson continued. "You never left my side. 36 hours straight, fighting for a life that meant nothing to you. That's not just medical training. That's character." "I took an oath," Margaret murmured. "An oath Chicago tried to make you break, but you held to it, even here at the end of everything." He shifted, wincing slightly. "I'm offering you a chance to keep holding to it, to be what you were meant to be, not what others forced you to become." The offer hung in the air like morning mist, beautiful and fragile. Margaret wanted to reach for it, wanted it with a fierce ache that surprised her. But trust came hard after betrayal. "What about Harlan Doyle? Your troubles won't end just because you survived. I'd be walking into a war." Jackson's smile held an edge sharp as winter wind. "Maybe, but I'd rather have someone like you beside me in a fight than a dozen hired guns. Besides, once Harlan learns I'm alive and protected, he might think twice about his plans. Or he might try harder." "Possible. But that's tomorrow's problem. Today, we need to focus on getting strong enough to face whatever comes." He studied her thoughtfully. "Starting with getting some meat back on your bones. You can't help anyone if you collapse from hunger." Margaret felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I'm fine. Your skin and bones held together by willpower. Eat." He pushed the remaining jerky toward her. "Doctor's orders." Despite everything, she found herself almost smiling. "You're not a doctor." "No, but I know stubborn when I see it. Takes one to know one." His expression grew serious again. "I'm not asking for an answer now. Just think about it. A new life, honest work, people who'd value what you can do. It's not charity. Margaret, I need someone with your skills. The ranch needs it. Hell, the whole valley needs it." She took another piece of jerky, chewing slowly while her mind raced. A chance to practice medicine again, to be useful, valued, respected, to leave behind the shadow of disgrace and build something new under these vast western skies. It seemed too good to be true. In her experience, such gifts always came with hidden costs. But watching Jackson Mitchell's steady gaze, the honest planes of his face marked by sun and struggle, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, the West operated by different rules, where a person's worth was measured in deeds, not reputation, where second chances grew like wildflowers after rain. "I'll think about it," she said finally. Jackson nodded, satisfied. "That's all I ask. Now, tell me about this place. How'd you find it? Must be a story there." Margaret allowed the change of subject, grateful for the reprieve from intensity. As she told him about discovering the abandoned prospector's cabin, about her first terrifying nights alone with wolves howling in the darkness, she felt something ease between them. Two survivors sharing tales beside a meager fire, finding unexpected comfort in companionship. Outside, the sun climbed toward noon, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of gold and shadow. The storm had passed, leaving crystal clarity in its wake. Change hung in the air like the scent of pine and possibility. For the first time in months, Margaret Sullivan dared to hope. The first sign of trouble came at sunset on the third day. Margaret had just finished changing Jackson's bandages when she heard it, the distant whinny of a horse. Quickly muffled, she froze, her hands still on the fresh linen, and met Jackson's eyes. He'd heard it too. "Could be anyone," she whispered, though they both knew better. "Could be." Jackson's hand moved to the Colt revolver they'd placed within his reach. "But best we prepare for it not to be." They'd spent 3 days getting ready for this possibility. Jackson had improved remarkably under Margaret's care, able to sit up without support and even take a few careful steps. But he was nowhere near fighting strength, and they both knew it. Margaret moved to the window, peering through a crack in the shutters. The setting sun painted the snow blood red, and long shadows stretched between the pines. At first, she saw nothing. Then, Movement. A flash of color that didn't belong to the forest. 3 riders, she breathed. Maybe 4, coming up from the south trail. Jackson cursed softly. Harlan's men. Has to be. They're checking every possible shelter. He struggled to stand, gritting his teeth against the pain. You need to stay still before you tear those stitches. Margaret's mind raced through their options. Few, and none of them good. The root cellar. There's a root cellar under the back corner, covered in snow. But I'm not hiding while you face them alone. You're not facing anyone with a hole in your chest. She helped him to his feet, supporting his weight. This isn't about pride, Jackson. It's about survival. If they find you, we're both dead. If they only find me, they'll want to know if you've seen anyone. Harlan's men aren't known for asking politely. Margaret's jaw set stubbornly. Then I'll be very convincing in my ignorance. Now move. We don't have time to argue. The root cellar was a cramped space, barely big enough for a man to crouch in. Margaret had discovered it her second week in the cabin, half collapsed and full of rotted vegetables. She'd cleared it out, never imagining it would serve as a hideout. Jackson resisted every step, but his weakness betrayed him. By the time they reached the cellar, he was breathing hard, sweat beading his forehead despite the cold. Margaret helped him down, handed him his revolver and a canteen. If they find me, if things go badly, you stay hidden, she ordered. No heroics. You're no good to anyone dead. Margaret, promise me. His gray eyes blazed with frustration, but he nodded tightly. Don't let them in if you can help it. And Margaret, be careful. She dropped the cellar door and kicked snow over it, then hurried back inside. Her hands shook as she hid any sign of Jackson's presence. The bloodied bandages went into the fire, his boots behind her trunk, the extra blanket folded and tucked away. She scattered her meager medical supplies to make them look older, less recently used. The knock came just as she finished. 3 hard raps that spoke of authority and impatience. Margaret took a breath, schooled her features into weary suspicion, and opened the door a crack. Yes? 3 men stood outside, trail-worn and hard-faced. The leader, a thin man with pale eyes and a drooping mustache, touched his hat brim mockingly. Evening, ma'am. Name's Cole Watson. These here are my associates, Mr. Briggs and Mr. Tanner. Good evening. Margaret didn't open the door wider. What can I do for you, gentlemen? Watson's smile didn't reach his eyes. We're looking for someone. Man got himself shot a few days back. Might have sought shelter in these parts. Big fellow, dark hair, riding a bay stallion with white stockings. Haven't seen anyone like that. Margaret let a touch of fear enter her voice. Not difficult, under the circumstances. I don't get many visitors up here. That's so? Watson leaned against the doorframe, trying to see past her. Mind if we come in? Warm ourselves by your fire. Been a cold day of searching. I'd rather you didn't. A woman alone has to be careful. Smart thinking. Watson's eyes narrowed, studying her worn dress and gaunt features. Though you don't look like you've got much worth taking. How long you been squatting in old Jeb's place? Since autumn. And I'm not squatting. Jeb Miller was my uncle. Left me the cabin when he died. It was a lie she'd prepared, knowing the prospector who'd built this place had no family anyone knew of. Watson seemed to accept it, though his gaze remained suspicious. Your uncle, huh? Funny. Old Jeb never mentioned no niece. Briggs, a stocky man with scarred knuckles, spit tobacco juice into the snow. Course, he didn't mention much of anything after that rock slide took him. We weren't close, Margaret said stiffly. But blood is blood. Indeed it is. Watson straightened. Well, ma'am, I'd hate to think you were lying to us. See, the man we're looking for is dangerous. Shot a friend of ours in cold blood. Stole money meant for honest folk. If someone was hiding him, well, that'd make them an accessory to murder. Margaret let her eyes widen. Murder? I haven't seen anyone, I swear. Just my horse and me up here. Your horse? Tanner, silent until now, spoke up. He was younger than the others, with the restless energy of a hunting dog. "Didn't see no horse when we rode up." Margaret's heart hammered, but she kept her voice steady. "She's in the lean-to around back. Old mare, not much to look at, but she's all I have." Watson studied her for a long moment, then nodded to his men. Tanner disappeared around the cabin while Briggs positioned himself where he could see both Margaret and the surrounding forest. They'd done this before, she realized, many times. Tanner returned, shaking his head. "Just an old nag, like she said, but boss—" He held up something that made Margaret's blood turn to ice. A piece of cloth, dark with dried blood. She'd missed one of the bandages. Watson's demeanor changed instantly. His hand dropped to his gun. "Now that's interesting. You want to explain why there's bloody rags in your woodpile?" Margaret's mind raced. I cut myself, chopping wood. It happens when you're alone. No one to help." "Show me." "What?" "The cut. Show me where you hurt yourself so bad it bled through that much cloth." Margaret held out her hands, displaying various small cuts and calluses, but nothing serious enough to explain the bandage. Watson's smile turned predatory. "Ma'am, I think you'd better invite us in after all. We need to have a more thorough conversation about your recent visitors." Before Margaret could respond, Watson pushed past her into the cabin. His men followed, Briggs closing the door behind them with ominous finality. The small space suddenly felt much smaller, with 3 armed men filling it. "Nice place," Watson said conversationally, his eyes cataloging every detail. "Cozy. Must get lonely, though. Might make a woman grateful for company. Even the wrong kind. I told you, I haven't seen anyone." "Uh-huh." Watson picked up the poker from beside the fireplace, hefting its weight thoughtfully. "You know what I think? I think Jackson Mitchell crawled up here bleeding like a stuck pig, and you took pity on him, woman's tender heart and all. Patched him up, maybe sent him on his way. That sound about right?" "I don't know any Jackson Mitchell." Watson moved faster than she expected, the poker whistling past her face to crash into the wall. Margaret stumbled back, genuinely frightened now. "Don't lie to me." Watson's veneer of civility cracked, showing the violence beneath. "We tracked him this far. His horse's tracks led up this mountain before the snow covered them. This is the only shelter for miles. Then he must have passed by without stopping." Margaret fought to keep her voice level. "Or died in the storm. I told you, I've seen no one." Watson studied her, then nodded to Briggs. The stocky man began a methodical search, overturning her few possessions, checking for loose floorboards. Margaret watched her meager belongings scattered, anger beginning to override fear. "Even if this Mitchell person had come here," she said coldly, "what makes you think I'd tell you? You break into my home, threaten me, destroy my things." Watson backhanded her casually, sending her sprawling. Stars exploded across her vision as she hit the floor. "What makes me think you'll tell? Because you're smart enough to know what happens to women who cross Harlan Doyle." Margaret tasted blood. Her lips split from the blow. She pushed herself up slowly, meeting Watson's pale eyes with all the defiance she could muster. "I'm a healer. If someone came to me hurt, I'd help them. It's what I do, but no one came." "A healer?" Watson laughed. "Out here? What are you really? Some whore who got too old for the trade? Or maybe you killed old Jeb yourself for his claim. Found something, boss." Tanner held up Jackson's spare shirt. The one she'd forgotten was drying behind the stove. No blood on it, but clearly a man's garment, far too large for her. Watson's eyes glittered with triumph. Well, whose shirt might that be?" "Your uncle's, except Jeb Miller was a small man, and that shirt would fit someone about, Jackson Mitchell's size." Margaret's mind went blank. There was no explanation that would satisfy them now. She glanced toward the door, calculating her chances of reaching it. "Don't even think about it." Watson drew his gun, pointing it at her almost lazily. "Now, you're going to tell us where Mitchell went, or things are going to get unpleasant. Briggs here has a real talent for making people talk." Briggs grinned, cracking his scarred knuckles. "Haven't had a woman in a while? Might be fun to take my time." Real terror flooded through Margaret then. She'd faced professional disgrace, starvation, and freezing. But this was different. This was the raw, ugly violence that lurked at civilization's edges. "Last chance," Watson said. "Where's Mitchell?" Margaret lifted her chin, finding courage in desperation. "Go to hell." Watson sighed theatrically. "Briggs, show the lady what happens when—" The gunshot was impossibly loud in the small cabin. Briggs spun, clutching his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. Watson and Tanner whirled toward the door as it crashed open. Jackson Mitchell stood framed in the doorway, looking like death warmed over but holding his Colt rock steady. "Step away from the lady! Mitchell!" Watson's gun swung toward him. "You're supposed to be—" Jackson's second shot took Watson's gun hand, sending the weapon spinning across the floor. The outlaw screamed, clutching his mangled fingers. Tanner went for his own weapon, but Margaret moved without thinking, swinging the poker Watson had dropped. It connected with Tanner's knee with a satisfying crack, dropping him howling to the floor. "Everyone stay real still," Jackson commanded, though the effort of standing was clearly costing him. Margaret could see fresh blood seeping through his shirt where he'd torn stitches. "Miss Sullivan, would you kindly collect their weapons?" Margaret moved quickly, gathering guns and knives, while the three men groaned and cursed. Jackson kept his Colt trained on them, but she could see his hand beginning to shake. "You can't kill us all," Watson gasped through his pain. "Doyle will send more. He'll burn that ranch of yours to the ground." "Maybe," Jackson agreed. "But you won't be there to see it." His voice hardened. "You touched her. That was your last mistake." Watson's eyes widened as he realized Jackson meant it. "Wait, we can make a deal. The only deal you're getting is this. You live, but you leave. Tonight, get on your horses and ride back to Harlan. Tell him I'm alive. I'm ready for him. And if he sends any more men after me or mine, I'll come for him personally." "You expect us to ride like this?" Briggs gestured at his bleeding shoulder. "You rode up here ready to torture a woman for information. Count yourself lucky I don't return the favor." Jackson's gray eyes were cold as winter steel. "Margaret, in my saddlebags, there's rope." They tied the outlaws securely, Margaret using her medical knowledge to ensure the bonds were tight but wouldn't cut off circulation. She also, despite everything, did basic field dressing on their wounds. Old habits died hard. "You're wasting kindness," Jackson muttered as she wrapped Watson's hand. "No," Margaret said firmly. "I'm choosing who I want to be." By the time they marched the three men to their horses and sent them on their way with dire warnings, full dark had fallen. Jackson made it back to the cabin before his legs gave out, collapsing just inside the door. "Damn fool!" Margaret scolded as she helped him to the bed she'd finally managed to cobble together from pine boards and rope. "I told you to stay hidden. Heard Watson hit you." Jackson's jaw clenched. "Nobody touches you while I'm breathing." His protective fury warmed something deep inside her, something she'd thought frozen beyond recovery. Margaret busied herself checking his reopened wound, using the last of the good whiskey to clean it. "We can't stay here," she said quietly. "They know where I am now. Even if Watson doesn't come back, Doyle will send others. Then you'll come with me. Tonight. Storm's coming in. It'll cover our tracks." Jackson caught her hand. "I'm sorry. Margaret, I brought this to your door." "No." She squeezed his fingers gently. "You brought purpose back to my life. That's worth any risk." As she worked to repair the damage to his wound, Margaret realized she meant it. For months, she'd been slowly dying in this cabin, body and spirit withering away. Jackson Mitchell had crashed into her life like spring-breaking winter's grip, reminding her who she truly was. A healer, a fighter, a woman who wouldn't break, no matter how hard the world tried. Outside, the first snowflakes began to fall, covering the blood and violence with clean white silence. But inside the cabin, preparing for a dangerous journey, two souls found warmth in shared determination and the first stirrings of something deeper than gratitude or need. Something that might, given time and trust, grow into love. The storm struck with vengeance as they left the cabin behind, Margaret had fashioned a travois from pine branches and rope, knowing Jackson couldn't ride 15 miles in his condition. He'd protested, of course, but the fresh blood on his shirt ended that argument quickly. "This is humiliating," he muttered as she helped him onto the makeshift stretcher behind his patient bay stallion. "Better humiliated than dead," Margaret replied, checking the knots one final time. She'd bundled him in every blanket they had, knowing the cold would be their enemy as much as any pursuit. "Besides, you've already played hero once tonight. My turn." She mounted her old mare, taking the bay's lead rope. The horses picked their way carefully through the deepening snow, the travois leaving tracks that would vanish within hours. Margaret had never been more grateful for bad weather. They'd gone perhaps 3 miles when Jackson's condition worsened. His skin burned with returning fever, and he'd begun muttering incoherently, names and places she didn't recognize, fragments of memory or delirium. "We need shelter," Margaret said, though she knew stopping could mean death if Watson had lied about retreating. The temperature was dropping fast, and Jackson's shivering had progressed to the dangerous stillness that preceded severe hypothermia. "There!" he gasped during a lucid moment, pointing weakly toward a cluster of rocks. Old mine shaft. Used it. In storms." Margaret found the entrance half hidden by snow and undergrowth. It was more of a natural cave enhanced by some long-ago prospector, but it cut the wind and offered concealment. She led the horses inside, then dragged Jackson as far from the entrance as possible. His fever had spiked dangerously. In the light of her small lantern, she could see his wound had reopened completely, probably torn during his heroics at the cabin. Fresh blood seeped through the bandages, and the edges looked angry and inflamed. "Should have stayed hidden," he mumbled, catching her hand as she worked. "But couldn't let them hurt you." "Hush," Margaret said, though his protectiveness touched her deeply. "Save your strength." She did what she could with their limited supplies, cleaned the wound again, packed it with the last of the clean cloth, and forced willow bark tea between his lips. But she knew it wasn't enough. Without proper medical supplies and rest, infection would claim him before they reached his ranch. "Talk to me," Jackson said suddenly, his gray eyes focusing with effort. "Need to stay awake. Tell me about before, when you were happy." Margaret's hand stilled on the bandages. "Why?" "Because you get this look when you're working, like you're exactly where you belong. Want to know that woman?" She resumed her task, considering. "I had a patient once, a little girl named Emma, 7 years old, bright as a new penny. She'd fallen from a roof, broke her leg in 3 places. The doctors said she'd never walk properly again. But you disagreed. I knew she was a fighter, like someone else I've recently met." Margaret smiled softly at the memory. "I worked with her every day for months, exercises, stretches, encouragement when she wanted to quit. The doctors called it a waste of time. Let me guess, she proved them wrong. Ran right past them 6 months later, laughing like a lark." The smile faded. "Her family was poor, couldn't pay much. The hospital board said I was spending too much time on charity cases. But how could I not? She trusted me to help her heal." Jackson's hand found hers, his palm fever-hot, but his touch gentle. "That's the difference between you and them. You see people, not ledgers. Look where it got me." "Yes, look where—" His eyes held hers steadily despite the pain. "Right where you were needed most. If you'd been safe in Chicago, I'd be dead in the snow." Margaret felt tears threaten. This man, even burning with fever and fighting infection, insisted on seeing her worth when the world had spent months telling her she had none. "My turn," she said, needing to deflect the intensity. "Tell me about your sister, Catherine." "Right." Jackson's expression softened. "Cat, 5 years younger, 10 times smarter. When our parents died, everyone said I should send her east to relatives. Let them make a proper lady of her. She told them all to, well, she expressed her disagreement forcefully. Despite everything, Margaret found herself smiling. Sounds like a formidable woman. You'll like her. She'll like you too. Someone who can keep me from bleeding out and put 3 outlaws on the ground with a poker? That's Kat's kind of person. I hardly put them on the ground. Just encouraged Tanner to reconsider his choices. While I was about to fall over from standing too long, Jackson's attempt at levity couldn't hide his frustration. Some protector I turned out to be. You came when I needed you. That's all that matters. They sat in silence for a moment, hands still linked, the storm howling outside their shelter. In the flickering lantern light, Margaret could almost pretend they were somewhere safe, that the morning wouldn't bring new dangers. Margaret, Jackson said quietly, if something happens, nothing's going to happen. Listen to me, please. His grip tightened. If I don't make it, you take my horse, my guns, everything. Ride to the Double M. Tell Sam Cooper, he's my foreman. Tell him what occurred. He'll see you're taken care of. You're going to make it. But if I don't, then I'll drag your body to that ranch just so I can tell your sister what a stubborn fool her brother was. Margaret's voice cracked slightly. You're not dying on my watch. Jackson Mitchell, I've lost too much already. I won't lose you too. The words hung between them, heavier with meaning than she'd intended. Jackson studied her face, seeing past the exhaustion and fear to something deeper. You know, he said softly, when I woke up in your cabin, first thing I saw was your face. Thought I'd died and somehow snuck into heaven. Except angels probably eat better than hardtack and melted snow. Delirious ravings don't count as compliments. Wasn't delirious. Well, not completely. He raised their joined hands, pressing his lips to her knuckles in a gesture that was both courtly and intimate. You saved more than my life, Margaret Sullivan. You reminded me that good people still exist, even in hard places, especially in hard places. The moment stretched, fragile as spun glass. Margaret leaned closer, drawn by something stronger than wisdom or caution. Their faces were inches apart when Jackson's body convulsed with violent shivering, breaking the spell. The fever, Margaret said unnecessarily, pulling back to grab more blankets. Her cheeks burned, and not from the cold. She worked through the night, fighting the infection with determination and prayer. Jackson drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes lucid, sometimes lost in memory. He talked about his parents, taken by cholera when he was 19, about building the ranch from nothing, earning every acre through sweat and stubbornness, about the drought that was slowly strangling the valley, making men desperate enough to kill. Water rights, he mumbled during one of his clearer moments. Everything comes down to water. Harlan knows if he controls the stream, he controls the valley. Can charge whatever he wants, drive out anyone who won't pay. But your rights are legal. You said so. Legal doesn't matter if I'm dead. No heir except Kat, and a woman can't hold water rights alone, not without a husband to enforce them. His laugh was bitter. Harlan's son has been sniffing around her for months. Probably figures marrying her is easier than killing us both. Margaret's stomach turned at the calculating cruelty of it. Your sister doesn't strike me as someone who'd marry under duress. She'd do it to save the ranch, the families who depend on us. That's why I have to live. Can't let her sacrifice herself for my failure. You haven't failed anyone, haven't I? Got myself shot, brought killers to your door, and now I'm probably dying in a cave while Harlan moves on everything I've built. You're not dying, Margaret said firmly. And when we reach your ranch, we'll face whatever comes. Together, Jackson's eyes found hers. Together? You offered me a position, remember? I'm accepting, assuming the offer still stands. Margaret, you don't have to. Yes, I do. She touched his face gently, feeling the fever beneath his skin. I've been running for months. Jackson, hiding from what happened, from who I used to be, but these past days, working to save you, fighting beside you, I remembered. I'm tired of running, tired of being alone. You won't be alone anymore, he promised. Not ever again, if I have anything to say about it. This time, when she leaned close, he met her halfway. The kiss was gentle, tentative, two wounded souls finding solace in each other. It tasted of willow bark, tea, and hope, of new beginnings born in the depths of winter. When they parted, Jackson's eyes had cleared slightly. That's better medicine than anything in your bag. Flatterer. But Margaret smiled, the first real smile she'd worn in months. Rest now. Dawn's not far off, and we need to move as soon as the storm breaks. She settled beside him, sharing warmth and blankets, her head on his shoulder. Outside, the blizzard raged on, but inside their small shelter, something new and precious took root. Margaret? Jackson's voice was drowsy but content. When this is over, when Harlan's dealt with and the ranch is safe, would you consider, that is, would you let me court you properly? Margaret's heart skipped. Mr. Mitchell, are you proposing a proposal? Maybe. Would that be so terrible? She thought of her ruined reputation, her months of isolation, the way the world had cast her aside. Then she thought of Jackson's steady gray eyes, his unflinching protection, the way he saw her worth when she'd forgotten it herself. No, she said softly. It wouldn't be terrible at all. They dozed fitfully as the storm spent itself, two battered souls finding peace in each other's presence. When dawn finally broke, painting the cave entrance in shades of rose and gold, Margaret checked Jackson's wound and found the infection retreating. His fever had broken in the night, leaving him weak but clear-eyed. Ready to go home? She asked. Jackson squeezed her hand, and in that simple gesture lay promises of safety, belonging, and something that might grow into love. Ready, he said. They emerged from the cave to find a world transformed by snow, pristine and new. Somewhere ahead lay the Double M Ranch and all the challenges waiting there. But for now, in this moment suspended between night and day, between old life and new, they had each other. It was enough. It was everything. The Double M Ranch emerged from the snow like something from a dream, or a nightmare, even from a distance. Margaret could see something was wrong. No smoke rose from the chimneys. No hands moved about their morning chores. The place had an abandoned quality that made her stomach clench with dread. Too quiet, Jackson muttered, pushing himself up despite her protests. He'd insisted on riding the last 5 miles, though she could see the effort cost him dearly. Should be activity by now. Sam always has the boys out early. They approached cautiously, Jackson checking his Colt while Margaret gripped the rifle they'd taken from Watson's men. The main house, a sturdy 2-story structure of logs and stone, showed no signs of damage, but the barn doors stood open to the wind. "Catherine," Jackson called, his voice cracking with worry. "Sam, anyone!" A figure appeared in the doorway of the main house, a young woman with Jackson's dark hair and determined chin, holding a shotgun with practiced ease. Relief flooded her face when she recognized her brother. "Jackson, thank God!" Catherine Mitchell flew down the steps, her composure cracking. "We thought you were dead." Harlan's men said. She stopped short, noticing Margaret. "Who's this?" "The woman who saved my life." Jackson said simply, "Margaret Sullivan. Meet my sister Catherine. Cat, lower that shotgun before you shoot someone we like." Catherine studied Margaret with sharp gray eyes so like her brother's, taking in the worn clothes, the medical bag, the protective way she hovered near Jackson. Then she smiled, transforming her serious face into something warm and welcoming. "Then I owe you more than I can say, Miss Sullivan." She moved to help Jackson dismount, gasping when she saw the blood on his shirt. "You're hurt." "I'm fine. Where is everyone? Where's Sam?" Catherine's expression darkened. "Scattered? Harlan came 2 days ago with 20 men and a judge's order. Said you were dead, that the water rights reverted to the territory without a male heir. Gave us 48 hours to vacate." "That's not how the law works," Margaret said, helping support Jackson's weight. "It is when you own the judge," Catherine replied bitterly. "Sam took most of the hands to town, trying to find a lawyer who isn't in Harlan's pocket. The others are moving the cattle to the north pasture, away from the water. I stayed to protect what I could." They helped Jackson inside, where the house told its own story of siege preparations. Furniture barricaded windows. Ammunition lined the mantel, and food supplies were stacked in defensive positions. Catherine had clearly been preparing for war. "Let me look at that wound," Catherine said, but Margaret was already guiding Jackson to the kitchen table. "I'm a nurse," Margaret explained, opening her medical bag. "Well, the wound's infected, but improving. He needs rest and proper care." Catherine watched Margaret work with an appraising eye. "You're not just any nurse. Those are surgeons' hands. I've had good training." Margaret didn't elaborate, focusing on cleaning Jackson's wound with supplies far better than anything she'd had in the cabin. Catherine, blessedly, didn't push. "Tell me about this judge's order," Jackson said through gritted teeth as Margaret worked. "Judge Blackwood rode out with Harlan personally. Claims you died intestate, that water rights can't pass to a woman alone. Harlan generously offered to buy the ranch for 1/10 of its value. Or," Catherine's jaw tightened, "or his son William would marry me and manage the property." Jackson cursed viciously. "Over my dead body." "That was rather the point. Brother, we need those documents," Jackson said suddenly. "The ones in Father's old desk, remember? The ones he said to keep safe." Catherine's eyes widened. "The original water rights grant, but I looked. The desk is locked, and I could never find the key. Because it's not in the desk." Despite his pain, Jackson smiled grimly. "Check behind the third stone from the left in the root cellar. Father showed me before he died. Made me swear to tell no one unless something like this happened." Catherine ran from the room, returning minutes later with a metal box dirt still clinging to its surface. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were documents that made Margaret's breath catch. "These predate territorial government," she said, examining the papers with growing excitement. "Spanish land grant, transferred legally through Mexican authority to American ownership. And here, water rights granted in perpetuity to the Mitchell family and their heirs, regardless of gender. Father always said we had ironclad rights," Jackson murmured. "But will it matter? Harlan owns Judge Blackwood. He doesn't own the federal marshal in Denver," Margaret said thoughtfully. "These documents are old enough to fall under federal jurisdiction. Telegraph the marshal's office. Include copies of everything." Catherine stared at her. "You know federal law?" "I had dealings with lawyers in Chicago before." Margaret kept her eyes on the documents, unable to meet their gazes. "Your past is your business," Catherine said firmly. "What matters is you're here now, and you're helping. That's good enough for me." The sound of approaching horses cut short any response. Through the window, they could see riders coming fast, 12 men, with Harlan Doyle's silver hair visible in the lead. "They're early," Catherine said grimly, reaching for her shotgun. "No," Jackson struggled to stand. "I'll meet them. They need to see I'm alive." "You can barely walk," Margaret protested. "Then I'll lean on you." His eyes met hers, steady and trusting. "Both of you. We've faced this together." They emerged onto the porch as the riders pulled up. Jackson between the two women, standing tall despite the pain Margaret knew he felt. Harlan Doyle, a man with the look of a successful predator, smiled coldly from his mount. Well, Jackson Mitchell, risen from the dead, though you don't look far from returning there. Sorry to disappoint. Harlan, as you can see, reports of my death were premature. No matter." Harlan gestured to a nervous man in a black suit. "Judge Blackwood has already ruled. Your claim is invalid." "Based on false information," Margaret said, stepping forward. "Mr. Mitchell is very much alive, making your ruling moot." Harlan's eyes narrowed, studying her. "And who might you be?" "Margaret Sullivan, Mr. Mitchell's medical advisor and legal witness to his continued breathing." "Legal witness," Blackwood sputtered. "You're no lawyer." "No, but I can read." Margaret held up the original documents. "Spanish land grant, 1823, Mexican confirmation. 1841. American territorial acceptance. 1851. Water rights granted to the Mitchell family, not just male heirs, all heirs, in perpetuity. Let me see those. Blackwood reached for the papers, but Margaret stepped back. I think not. These are going to the federal marshal, along with a full report of attempted murder, fraud, and judicial corruption. You can't prove anything, Harlan said, but uncertainty flickered in his eyes. Can't I? Jackson smiled coldly. Your men already confessed. Watson, Briggs, and Tanner. They were quite talkative about who hired them to kill me, even mentioned specific amounts paid. It was a bluff. The men had said no such thing, but Harlan didn't know that. His hand drifted toward his gun. I wouldn't, Catherine said conversationally. Her shotgun aimed steadily at Harlan's chest. This close, I won't miss. You're making a mistake, Harlan said, his veneer of civility cracking. I have influence, connections. You can't fight me and win. Maybe not, Jackson agreed. But we can make it costly. Every ranch family in this valley knows what you're doing. Push us too hard, and they'll unite against you. Even your bought judge can't rule against everyone. And there's another problem, Margaret added. Your son William, the one you plan to marry to Miss Mitchell. I treated him last spring for what his father called exhaustion, but we both know what opium addiction looks like, don't we? How long before he gambles away everything you've stolen? Harlan went white. You're lying. Room 12, Garnett Hotel in Martinez. Every Tuesday and Friday, the proprietor keeps excellent records. Margaret had treated enough addiction to recognize the signs Catherine had mentioned about William Doyle's behavior. The guess about locations was pure invention. But Harlan's reaction confirmed her suspicions. This isn't over, Harlan snarled. Yes, it is. Sam Cooper rode into the yard, accompanied by a man wearing a federal badge and several armed deputies. The foreman's weathered face split in a grin seeing Jackson alive. Sorry we're late. Boss, took some time to fetch Marshal Briggs from Denver. He was mighty interested in those telegraph messages Miss Catherine sent. The federal marshal, a stern man with intelligent eyes, dismounted and approached Blackwood. Judge, I'll need you to come with me. Questions about your recent rulings have been raised. This is preposterous, Blackwood protested. I have authority. In territorial matters, yes, but water rights predating the territory fall under federal jurisdiction. Marshal Briggs examined the documents Margaret provided, nodding slowly. These appear legitimate. Any ruling against them would be irregular. Harlan made one last attempt. Mitchell, be reasonable. The drought's getting worse. Work with me, and we both prosper. Fight me, and we all suffer. I'll work with anyone who deals fairly. Jackson replied. But you tried to have me killed, threatened my sister, and attempted to steal what generations of my family built. So no, Harlan, no deals. The marshal gestured to his deputies. Mr. Doyle, I'll need you to come as well. Accusations of conspiracy to commit murder require investigation. As the group departed, Harlan shot one last venomous look at Margaret. You'll regret this, woman. I don't forget. Neither do I, Margaret replied calmly. After the dust settled, Sam Cooper pumped Jackson's hand, grinning broadly. Damn good to see you breathing, boss. We feared the worst when you didn't come home. Nearly was the worst. Would have been without Margaret. Jackson's arm slipped around her waist, drawing her close. Sam, this is Miss Sullivan. She'll be staying on as our medical advisor, and anything else she wants to be, Catherine added with a knowing smile. Anyone who can face down Harlan Doyle with nothing but documents and nerve belongs here. Margaret felt warmth bloom in her chest, not just from Jackson's touch or Catherine's acceptance, but from the sense of belonging that had eluded her for so long. The Double M wasn't just a ranch, it was a family, a purpose, a chance to rebuild everything she'd lost. There's still work ahead, Sam warned. Harlan won't give up easy, and that drought's not getting better. Then we'd better get started, Jackson said. First things first, I need to lie down before I fall down. And Sam, send word to the other ranchers. Tell them we're calling a water meeting. Time to work together instead of against each other." As they helped him inside, Margaret caught Catherine's arm. "That information about William Doyle? Thank you for mentioning it earlier. The guess about the hotel was pure bluff, but it worked." Catherine squeezed her hand. "You're already family. Margaret, we protect our own." Looking around at these people who'd accepted her without question, who valued her skills and courage over her past mistakes, Margaret felt the last walls around her heart crumble. She'd found more than safety in this wild country. She'd found home, and she would fight to protect it with everything she had. The water meeting was set for Sunday afternoon, giving the valley's ranchers time to travel to the Double M. Margaret spent the intervening days establishing herself in the household, turning a spare room into a makeshift clinic and tending not just to Jackson's recovery but to various ailments among the ranch hands. "You've got healing hands, miss," said Tom Garrett, an older cowboy whose arthritic joints had pained him for years. "That liniment of yours works better than anything Doc Holcomb ever gave me." Margaret smiled as she wrapped his knees. "Just a different approach. Mr. Garrett, sometimes the old remedies work best." Word spread quickly. By Saturday, a stream of visitors arrived seeking treatment: ranch wives with colicky babies, children with stubborn coughs, men with injuries they'd walked off until infection set in. Margaret treated them all, refusing payment despite their protests. "She's building something," Catherine observed to Jackson as they watched from the window. A young mother was leaving, clutching medicine for her fevered child and crying with relief. "Trust, goodwill, everything Harlan's been destroying." Jackson nodded, pride evident in his expression. "She doesn't even realize she's doing it. It's just who she is." Sunday dawned clear and cold. By noon, wagons and riders filled the yard as families arrived for the meeting. Margaret had helped Jackson dress in his best shirt and vest, though she'd insisted he use a walking stick. "I won't look weak in front of them," he'd protested. "You'll look worse if you fall on your face," she'd countered. "Pride heals no wounds." Jackson Mitchell. The main room had been cleared, chairs and benches arranged to accommodate the crowd. Margaret recognized some faces from her impromptu clinic, noting the warm nods she received. Whatever her past, these people judged her by her actions here and now. Jackson called the meeting to order, standing tall despite the walking stick. "Friends, neighbors, thank you for coming. We all know why we're here. This drought threatens everything we've built, and men like Harlan Doyle would use our desperation against us." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. "But I didn't call you here to speak against Harlan," Jackson continued. "I called you here to speak for something better: cooperation, shared sacrifice, survival for all, not profit for a few." "Fine words," called out Ben Harper, whose small ranch bordered Doyle's land. "But Harlan controls half the water in this valley. What choice do we have but to deal with him?" "The choice to work together," Margaret said, rising from her seat. Several heads turned in surprise. Women rarely spoke at such gatherings. "I've studied your water situation. The stream that feeds the Double M and several other ranches originates from 3 sources: mountain springs that converge upstream. Currently, you're all drawing water independently, often at the same times, depleting flow for those downstream." She moved to a map Catherine had helped her prepare. "But if you coordinate, schedule water draws, maintain the stream banks to prevent erosion, perhaps even dig retention ponds during spring melt, you could make the existing water serve everyone better." "Who are you to tell us about water management?" demanded Karl Yoder, a stubborn German who'd feuded with his neighbors for years. "Someone who's seen cooperation save lives." Margaret replied calmly. "In Chicago hospitals, when supplies ran low, we learned to share resources, coordinate treatments. The principle is the same: work together or watch everything die separately." "The lady has a point," Sam Cooper said. "I've been saying for years we need to work smarter, not just harder." The room erupted in discussion, some eager, others skeptical. Jackson let it run its course before raising his hand for silence. "There's something else," he said. "Harlan's methods, intimidation, violence, using the law as a weapon. They only work if we let them. But together, we have power too. Economic power, political power, the power of right on our side. Harlan owns Judge Blackwood," someone called out. "But he doesn't own the federal courts," Margaret interjected. "And he doesn't own the newspapers in Denver and San Francisco. Public opinion matters. A story about wealthy ranchers stealing water from struggling families during a drought? That would bring scrutiny Harlan can't afford. Can't." She saw understanding dawn on several faces. These people had been thinking locally, but the wider world offered leverage they hadn't considered. The meeting continued for hours, plans taking shape. They would form a water rights association with elected representatives from each ranch. Water draws would be scheduled and monitored. They'd pool resources to dig retention ponds and maintain the stream. Most importantly, they'd stand together against any attempts to force them out. "And what about medical care?" asked Maria Santos, whose baby Margaret had treated. "Doc Holcomb charges more than most of us can afford, when he bothers to come at all." All eyes turned to Margaret. She felt Jackson's encouraging hand on her arm. "I'm not a doctor," she said carefully. "But I have training and experience. I'd be willing to hold regular clinics, treat what I can, and help arrange transport to proper hospitals for serious cases. In exchange—" She paused, thinking. "Perhaps a small subscription from each family, paid in money, goods, or labor as you're able." The enthusiasm was immediate. Within minutes, they'd agreed to convert an old line shack into a proper clinic, with families volunteering materials and work. As the crowd began dispersing, making plans and shaking hands on agreements, an unexpected visitor arrived. William Doyle, Harlan's son, rode up alone, his hands raised peacefully. "I come in peace," he called out, dismounting carefully. "May I speak with you, Jackson, and Miss Sullivan?" Jackson tensed, but Margaret saw something in the young man's face. Desperation, not threat. "Let him talk," she murmured. They met on the porch, Catherine standing guard with her ever-present shotgun. Up close. William Doyle looked haggard, his fine clothes hanging loose on a frame that spoke of poor health. "My father doesn't know I'm here," he began without preamble. Well, it wouldn't be pleasant, but I had to come, to warn you." "Warn us about what?" Jackson asked coldly. William's hands shook slightly as he pulled out a flask, then thought better of it. "He's not done. The federal marshal set him back, but he's hiring more men. Professionals from Texas. They'll make Watson's group look like choir boys." "Why tell us?" Margaret asked, studying him with a nurse's eye. The tremors, the pallor, the nervous gestures. Addiction, certainly, but also genuine distress. "Because I'm tired of being his weapon," William burst out. "You were right, Miss Sullivan, about the opium. About everything. He's used my weakness to control me for years. Promised if I married Miss Mitchell, he'd send me east for treatment. But I know better. He'd never let me go. I'd be his puppet forever. And Catherine would be trapped too." The anguish in his voice was real. Margaret felt an unexpected sympathy for this broken young man. "What do you want from us?" Catherine asked, lowering her shotgun slightly. "Nothing. I wanted to do one decent thing. To warn you. He plans to hit during the spring roundup when your men are scattered. Burn the barn. Poison the water source. Make it look like accidents." "When?" Jackson demanded. 2 weeks, maybe 3. The men he hired are still traveling." William swayed slightly, then steadied himself. "I should go. If he finds out I came here—" "Wait," Margaret said. "The treatment you need, it's real, difficult, painful, but possible. I've helped others through it." Hope flashed across William's face before despair crushed it. "My father would never allow—" "Your father doesn't have to know," Margaret said firmly. "Think about it. When you're ready, truly ready to be free, come find me." William stared at her for a long moment, then nodded jerkily. Thank you, both of you, and I'm sorry for everything my family has done." He rode away quickly, leaving them to digest his warning. "Could be a trap," Sam said, having overheard from inside. "Maybe." Jackson agreed. But that boy's suffering was real. "What do you think, Margaret?" "I think addiction makes people desperate enough to betray even cruel fathers," she said softly. "And I think we'd better prepare for the worst while hoping for the best." They spent the next week fortifying the ranch. The Water Rights Association proved its worth immediately. Neighboring ranchers sent men to help stand guard, turning the Double M into a fortress of mutual aid. Margaret organized medical supplies for potential casualties, teaching Catherine and others basic battlefield treatment. "You've done this before," Catherine observed as Margaret demonstrated how to pack a gunshot wound. "Chicago had its own wars," Margaret said simply. "Different weapons, same principles." Jackson recovered steadily under her care, the infection finally defeated. They stole moments together between preparations, quiet conversations by the fire, walks along the stream where he showed her his plans for the ranch, kisses that promised a future worth fighting for. "When this is over," he said one evening, pulling her close, "I want to do this properly, court you the way a lady deserves." "I'm no lady," Margaret protested. "I'm a disgraced nurse who—" He silenced her with a kiss. "You're the woman who saved my life, who stands beside me against all odds, who's healing this whole valley with her courage and skill. That makes you the finest lady I know." "Sweet talker," she murmured against his lips. "Just a man who knows what he wants," he replied. "And what I want is you, Margaret Sullivan, today, tomorrow, and all the days after." The attack came at dawn on the 10th day. Not the massive assault they'd expected, but something more subtle. Margaret woke to the acrid smell of smoke and shouts of alarm. "The grain stores!" someone yelled. "Fire in the grain stores!" They rushed out to find flames licking at the building where their winter feed was stored. As the ranch hands formed a bucket brigade, Jackson grabbed Margaret's arm. "This is a diversion. They're after something else." His instinct proved correct. While everyone fought the fire, riders approached from the north, heading not for the house, but for the stream itself. "The water!" Catherine shouted, raising her rifle. "They've got barrels! Poison!" What followed was chaos. Gunfire erupted as the Double M defenders engaged the attackers. Margaret found herself pressed into service, not as a nurse, but as a fighter. Using a rifle Jackson had taught her to shoot, the battle was fierce but brief. The element of surprise lost. Harlan's hired guns retreated, leaving several wounded behind. Margaret's conscience wouldn't let her ignore injured men, even enemies. "You're wasting kindness," one growled as she bandaged his shoulder. "Doyle will just hire more." "Perhaps," Margaret said calmly. "Or perhaps word will spread that the Double M treats even enemies with mercy. Which ranch would you rather work for? One that shoots wounded men, or one that heals them?" The man had no answer to that. By full daylight, the damage was assessed. The grain store was half destroyed but salvageable. No poison had reached the water. Most importantly, no one on their side had been killed, though several bore wounds Margaret quickly tended. "They'll be back," Jackson said grimly. "Let them come." Sam replied, "We held today, we'll hold tomorrow." But it was William Doyle who brought the solution, arriving at sunset with papers that made Jackson whistle low. "My father's correspondence with the hired killers," William explained, swaying slightly but determined. "Names, dates, amounts paid. Enough to see him hanged or at least imprisoned." "Why?" Catherine asked. William met her eyes squarely. "Because Miss Sullivan was right. I want to be free. And maybe I want to be worthy of forgiveness someday." Margaret stepped forward. "The offer stands. Treatment, support, a chance at a different life. But only if you're truly ready." "I'm ready," William said. And for the first time, she believed him. The papers were telegraphed to the federal marshal that very night. By week's end, Harlan Doyle was in custody, his empire crumbling as former allies distanced themselves from scandal. The Water Rights Association stepped in to manage his holdings fairly, ensuring no single person could again threaten the valley's survival. Justice had come not through violence, but through courage, cooperation, and the unexpected redemption of a broken young man who chose truth over family loyalty. The valley had learned it was stronger together than apart, and at the center of it all, two wounded souls had found healing in each other's arms, building something new from the ashes of their separate pasts. Spring came early that year, bringing wildflowers to carpet the valley in purple and gold. The old line shack had been transformed into a proper clinic, with whitewashed walls and large windows that let in plenty of light. Margaret stood in the doorway, watching families arrive for the weekly medical day, her heart full in ways she'd never imagined possible during those desperate winter months. "Quite a change from that drafty cabin," Jackson said, coming up behind her. His recovery was complete now, only a slight stiffness in cold weather reminding them of how close they'd come to losing everything. "Everything's changed," Margaret agreed, leaning back against his solid warmth. "Sometimes I can hardly believe it's real. Believe it." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "You've brought healing to this whole valley, Margaret, not just with medicine, but with hope." The clinic had become the heart of the community. Women who'd never had proper medical care during pregnancies now had support. Children received vaccinations that city doctors had pioneered. Even William Doyle, 3 months into his difficult recovery, helped by keeping records and learning basic medical skills. "Miss Sullivan," young Emma Hartley ran up, clutching a bouquet of wildflowers. "For you. Mama says they're to make the clinic smell nice." Margaret accepted them with a smile, remembering another Emma from Chicago, the little girl who'd learned to run again. Perhaps all healing was connected, circles of hope widening like ripples on water. "Thank you, sweetheart. They're beautiful. How's that cough?" "All better. The honey medicine worked perfect." As Emma skipped away, Catherine emerged from the clinic. "William's finished organizing the supply shelves. He's quite meticulous when he's clear-headed." "He's doing well," Margaret confirmed. "Better than I'd hoped. Having purpose helps." Catherine nodded, then smiled mysteriously. "Speaking of purpose, Jackson has something to show you, says it's important." Margaret found Jackson by the stream, standing near a bend where cottonwoods provided shade, the spot where they often walked in the evenings, planning improvements to the ranch and the water system that now served the entire valley cooperatively. "You wanted to show me something?" He turned, and she caught her breath at his expression, nervous and determined and tender all at once. I do. Margaret, do you remember what I said in that cave? About doing things properly when this was all over? Jackson, let me finish, please." He took her hands, calloused thumbs stroking her palms. 6 months ago, I was dying in the snow. You could have left me there. God knows you had every reason to think only of your own survival. Instead, you fought death itself to save a stranger. I was just doing what your heart demanded. I know. His smile was soft. That's who you are. You heal people, Margaret. Not just their bodies, but their spirits. You healed mine in ways that go far beyond bullet wounds. Margaret's eyes stung with unshed tears. You healed me too. Gave me purpose again when I thought I'd lost everything. Then maybe we can keep healing each other. Jackson dropped to one knee, pulling out a simple gold band. Margaret Sullivan, will you marry me? Will you be my wife, my partner, the heart of this ranch and this family? The tears came then, flowing freely down her cheeks. Jackson, you know about Chicago, about my disgrace. I know you were blamed for something that wasn't your fault. I know you held to your principles even when it cost you everything. I know you're the strongest, most compassionate woman I've ever met. His voice roughened with emotion. Your past made you who you are. I wouldn't change a moment of it if it meant losing the woman standing before me now. Margaret looked at this man who'd given her sanctuary, purpose and love, who saw her not as a fallen woman but as someone worthy of respect and devotion. The answer came from the deepest part of her heart. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, Jackson Mitchell, I'll marry you. He slipped the ring on her finger, then rose to kiss her with all the passion and promise of their shared future. Around them, The cottonwoods rustled in the spring breeze, and the stream sang its eternal song of life flowing onward. The wedding took place a month later, the entire valley turning out to celebrate. The ceremony was held outdoors, under the vast western sky that had witnessed their journey from desperation to joy. Margaret wore a simple white dress that Catherine and the ranch women had sewn together, decorated with the wildflowers that now symbolized new beginnings. Tom Garrett, his arthritis much improved, played fiddle. Maria Santos organized the feast, with every family contributing dishes. Even Judge Blackwood attended, thoroughly chastened and eager to make amends by performing the ceremony with scrupulous legality. "Do you, Margaret Sullivan, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" he asked. Margaret looked at Jackson, seeing in his eyes all their shared struggles and triumphs. "I do." "And do you, Jackson Mitchell, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "With all my heart, I do." When they kissed, the entire valley erupted in cheers. This was more than a wedding. It was a celebration of survival, of community, of love conquering hardship. William Doyle, clear-eyed and steady now, approached them after the ceremony. "I owe you both more than I can ever repay," he said quietly. "You gave me a second chance when everyone else had given up." "That's what people do for each other," Margaret replied. "We all deserve second chances." Speaking of which, William produced an official-looking document. "My father's assets were liquidated to pay his crimes, but I retained the family homestead and enough to start over. I'd like to donate part of the land for a proper hospital. If you'd consider running it, Mrs. Mitchell." Margaret gasped. "A real hospital, not just a clinic, a place where she could fully use her skills, train others, serve the growing community." She looked at Jackson, who grinned. "I married a healer," he said. "I'd be a fool to keep her from her calling." The hospital opened the following winter, a modest but well-equipped building that served 3 valleys. Margaret trained local women as nurses, teaching them everything from wound care to midwifery. The stigma of Chicago faded entirely, replaced by the respect earned through countless lives saved and improved. Jackson expanded the ranch, implementing water conservation methods that became a model for the entire region. The cooperative spirit born from crisis continued, with ranchers sharing resources and knowledge. The Double M became known not just for its cattle, but for its innovation and generosity. Catherine married Sam Cooper in a quiet ceremony 2 years later, their partnership surprising no one who'd watched them work together. She continued her botanical studies, developing drought-resistant crops that helped the valley thrive even in dry years. One evening, 5 years after that snowy night when fate brought them together, Margaret and Jackson sat on their porch, watching their children play in the yard. 2 boys with their father's steady gray eyes, and a baby girl with her mother's gentle hands. "No regrets?" Jackson asked, pulling her close. Margaret thought of her journey, from respected nurse to disgraced woman, from starving in a mountain cabin to running a hospital that served hundreds. From loneliness so complete it nearly killed her to a love that filled every corner of her life. "None," she said firmly. "Every step led me here, led me to you." "That night in the snow," Jackson mused. "I thought I was dying, never imagined I was actually being born into the life I was meant to have." "We both were," Margaret agreed. "Sometimes the worst storms bring the greatest blessings." Their eldest son ran up, clutching a wooden toy horse. "Mama, will you tell us the story? About the snow and the bad men and how you saved Papa?" Margaret smiled, gathering her children close. It had become family legend, told and retold, each telling emphasizing different lessons: courage, compassion, the power of choosing to help even when it seems impossible. "Once upon a time," she began, "in the hardest winter anyone could remember, a woman lived alone in a tiny cabin." As she spoke, Jackson's hand found hers, their wedding rings catching the last light of day. The cabin where she'd nearly starved was gone now, dismantled for lumber to build homes for new settlers. But its legacy lived on in every life saved, every family helped, every act of healing that rippled outward from that desperate winter night. The stars emerged one by one, bright and eternal over the valley that had become their home. Inside the house, lamplight glowed warm through windows that had never known bars or boards for defense. The water flowed freely in its channels, shared fairly among all who needed it, and in the hospital that bore her name, Margaret Mitchell's trained nurses carried on the work of healing, their gentle hands and steady hearts testament to the power of second chances. Love had found them in the depths of winter, and like the spring that always followed snow, it had transformed everything it touched. From a starving nurse and a dying cowboy had grown a family, a community, and a legacy of hope that would outlast them all. In the end, that's what the best love stories do. They heal not just two hearts, but the whole world around them, one act of courage and compassion at a time. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope Margaret and Jackson's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine while telling it. Where are you listening from today? I'd love to hear from listeners around the world. Please share in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel for more authentic frontier tales of love, courage, and redemption. What did you think of Margaret and Jackson's story? Share your thoughts below. I read every comment and love connecting with fellow Western romance enthusiasts.